Excellency Sister President Mariam, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I carry greetings from Iraq, the suffering and resisting country. 30,000 mujahideens 26 years ago have suffered under the behest of Khomeini. Since then, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, tortured, many have become refugees. The hanging in Iran is the highest in the world except for China. And if one compares the population of the Chinese with the population of Iran, one can see the inhumane attitude toward hanging in Iran. The mullahs have been condemned repeatedly by the Human Rights Council, by Napi Pillay, and many others. Most of the human rights organizations have addressed these issues. Ashraf people, the Ashrafis, they were living in a camp called Ashraf Camp. But then, after the occupation of Iraq, they were moved, ironically, to a prison which was built by the Americans, but it is called Liberty. That prison is located near the airport of Baghdad. The people at Camp Liberty at the moment, the Ashrafis, bring into shame the international community attitude toward human rights. Instead of the international community arranging for a safe passage of those wretched people there who are being taken hostages by the government in Baghdad, which is a lackey of the mullahs in Tehran. Instead of giving them the safe passage, they have denied them of all of their rights, because now they are being placed in a prison and they are deprived of all of the human rights, whether treatment, education, health, or any of the expressions of human needs. Even today, this morning, a convoy of food and a convoy which should be taking medicine and food into the camp was refused entry. Today, this morning, they get this convoy once a week. In Iraq, after a full year of peaceful campaigning and demonstration by the Iraqi people, demanding their ordinary rights, people shouldn't be put in prison without a trial, there should be no discrimination, people should be treated equally, and all the normal things. For a whole year of demonstration, which the international community did not recognize, did not know, the government in Baghdad, acting at the behest of the Iranian mullahs, committed at least 4 massacres in Iraq, in Hawija, in Fallujah, in Mosul, and in Diyala. Nobody in the world talked about that one. The world was quiet about that one. This brings into disrepute sometimes the selectivity of how we address some of the human rights abuses in some places, at some times, by some people, and we don't do the same thing in other places. The uprising in Iraq, as a result of this abuse, it is not by ISIS. Please do not fall into this trap. ISIS is a terrorist organization. It may have 5,000 people, it may have 6,000 people. They cannot take over half the country of Iraq. This uprising in Iraq, it is by the people of Iraq in the governorates that have rose against the government. There are what's called the military councils, which are the people, the inhabitants of these governorates. They are being led by generals and senior army officers from the previous National Army of Iraq. There are the tribal councils, which is made up of the people of these areas. There are other forces, like, for instance, the Ba'athist, like the Naqshbandi movement. There are other, but certainly there is, when you have this situation, you have terrorist organizations there. These terrorist organizations do not represent the people. They do not represent Iraq, and most certainly they do not represent Islam. They can carry the banner of Islam, but they don't represent Islam or the Muslims, because no one would accept the abuse of people, of minorities, because if they have different religion or different ethnicity. Nobody accepts the destruction of mosques and churches. Nobody accepts the way they are treating the people in Iraq. But make no mistake, the ones who are suffering from ISIS are the Iraqis. It's not what my Prime Minister Cameron, David Cameron, said ISIS is a threat to Britain. I think his geography is not all that good, because I don't think ISIS represents a threat to Britain as such. Terrorism knows no boundaries. Everybody should be careful about terrorism. However, let's not be silly. The people who are suffering are the Iraqi people. The American bombing cannot fight terrorism. Terrorism cannot be fought from the air. It is the people who are suffering from terrorism are the people who can rid themselves of terrorism. And the Iraqis have done this before. ISIS were thrown out when they were fighting when the Iraqis were fighting the Americans went and bought some people, but they were the Iraqis were the people who got all those terrorist organizations out. Now, there is a humanitarian catastrophe taking place in the north of Iraq. There are almost 500,000 refugees who are not the Christians or the Yazidis. They are the Iraqis, the other Iraqis, the Muslims and the Arabs and what have you. There are almost now 10,000 Syrian refugees in Kurdistan. There are something like 20,000 people who are Yazidis and Christians who are Iraqis in the first instance, before they are Christians. Kurdistan needs aid. It does not need more bombs. It does not need more armaments. The current situation in Iraq, I'm sure everybody is aware that the Maliki government, or Maliki as a person, has been removed in theory. And this is one of the victories of the Iraqis. Maliki he is the Frankenstein that the Americans and British created. This man has taken control of the country, all of it. So he's the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Interior, the Commander-in-Chief, and he has control over the 7 main components of the state, including the Central Bank of Iraq, including the High Court. They are all attached to him. The present Prime Minister, who's been asked to take over, will never be able to get into the office, because Maliki still has all the weapons in his hand. He has all the forces in his hand. And unless the world understands that one, first of all, the Iraqi revolution must not be accused as being ISIS, because this is where we fall into the trap of the Bush doctrine at the time, when he thought that anyone who is opposed to the USA is a terrorist organization. And if the terrorist organization is a Muslim organization, then it must be Al-Qaeda. It cannot be anything else. French terrorists cannot be Qaeda because they are not Muslims. So now we have the situation that the propaganda is that the revolution in Iraq is ISIS because of the humanitarian problem. The new government, I don't think it's going to make any difference, because it's the same. This is a split within the same party, which is called Al-Dawa Party, which is an Iranian creation financed, managed, and dictated to, called Al-Dawah Party. And this is a split within the party between Maliki and the new Prime Minister. But I don't think we should be judgmental before we start. Let's wait for this man, see what he can do. He has certain easy things to do. He needs to restore justice. He needs to stop corruption. He needs to get everybody to participate. This country belongs to those people. It doesn't belong to any group, whether they are ethnicity, Kurds or Arabs or Christians or Muslims or Shiites or Sunnis. It doesn't belong to any group. This is a country which belongs to all of them, and everybody has the same right. And the equality we must have, and I think if pressure, and since the US still has contacts with the mullahs, I think they can tell them to just lift their hands off for a little while and let that country survive. Thank you very much.